I want to talk about something I did that most people who publish on Amazon KDP would never think about doing. I went through my entire book catalog and I deleted half of it. I didn't just unpublish, I didn't just put them on pause. I deleted them. And before you think, well, that just sounds really dramatic, I want to tell you actually why I did it, what made me finally pull the trigger on each book, and what actually changed in my business afterwards, because the result is probably something that most people wouldn't expect. And look, I know what you might be thinking. Why would you delete something you spent all that time building? Something that's just sitting there, it's not costing you anything to keep it there. And I thought the same thing for a very long time, but that thinking kept me holding on to a bunch of books that were doing more harm than good, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit to figure that out. Now, if you are new here, I'm Caroline. I'm a self-publisher who has been creating and selling books on Amazon KDP for 8 years. And on this channel, I show you how to do the same. Most self-publishers treat their book catalog like it is sacred. Every book you've ever published feels like something that you worked really, really hard on, something that deserves to stay there. And I totally get that. You put time into it, maybe you put some money into it, and taking it down feels like a waste of time. Maybe feels like admitting that you failed. But here's the thing. A book sitting on Amazon that isn't selling isn't an asset. It's clutter. And clutter has a cost, even if you can't see that cost on a spreadsheet. There's also something that happens psychologically when you have a large catalog of books that aren't performing. You tell yourself you'll go back and fix them. You'll update the keywords. You'll redo the cover, tweak the description, and that list of things that you're going to fix one day just keeps growing. And it sits there in the back of your mind, taking up space. Meanwhile, you're not fully committing to the books that are actually working because you're carrying the weight of everything else at the same time. So let me take you through the reasons books ended up on my list of books to delete, because it wasn't just one thing. It was a few different things. And I'd bet that at least one of them will sound familiar to you. The first one is books that I'd published before I really understood niche research. Early on, most people pick niches based on a feeling, something that looks popular, or maybe you heard someone else mention that it was doing well, or you just like the idea of it. I did that too. And some of those books were in niches that either didn't have enough buyers to go around, or they were so competitive that a new book had no realistic chance of ranking on page 1 of search results. Those books weren't bad necessarily, they were just in the wrong place, and no amount of waiting was going to fix that. The hard part about this one is when you're new, you don't know what good niche research looks like. So you don't know that you're skipping it. You think you're doing the right thing because you looked at what was already selling and you tried to make something similar, but looking at what's selling and understanding why it's selling and whether there's room for you in that niche are two completely different things. I've published books in niches where the top sellers had tens of thousands of reviews and had been sitting at the top of those results for years. There was never a path for a new book to break in there, and I just didn't know how to see that at the time. If niche research is something that you are still figuring out, I've put together a free report with 100 profitable KDP niche opportunities, niches with real demand behind them that I either already publish in myself or I would actually consider publishing in. It's completely free. It's linked down in the description below. The next reason was quality, and this one's a little harder to admit. Some of my earlier books were just not good enough. The interiors were basic, the layouts weren't what they should have been, and the covers were definitely not competing with what was already ranking in those niches. When I went back and looked at them with honest eyes, I knew that if I came across those books as a buyer, I probably wouldn't have purchased them. That's a pretty clear signal. If you wouldn't buy your own book, you can't really be surprised that other people aren't buying it either. The standard has gone up pretty significantly on Amazon over the last few years. What was good enough 3 or 4 years ago isn't necessarily good enough now. Buyers have more choice, they're a lot more discerning, and the books that are competing for their attention have got better. Some of my older books were made to a standard that made sense at the time, but they just don't hold up anymore. And rather than invest time and money into bringing them up to scratch in niches I wasn't sure were worth it, it made a lot more sense to let them go and focus that energy somewhere better. Then there were the books that had never made a single sale, not one. Some of them had been sitting there for over a year with 0 sales. And I kept telling myself I'd go back and fix the listing, update the keywords, improve the cover, but I never did, because deep down, I think I knew the problem wasn't the listing. The niche wasn't right, or the book wasn't strong enough, or both. A book with 0 sales after 12 months is telling you something. You can either listen to it or keep ignoring it, but it is not going to start selling on its own. There's a version of this that a lot of self-publishers are in denial about. They've got books sitting there with no sales, and they tell themselves it's because they haven't promoted them, or because they haven't had time to sort the keywords out, or because they just need to be patient. And sometimes that is true, but most of the time, after a certain point, zero sales is a verdict. It's Amazon telling you that nobody searching for what you're offering is clicking your book. And that's a fundamental problem that a small tweak usually isn't going to fix. A few more reasons that pushed books onto the list. Covers that couldn't compete. I'd go and I'd search the main keyword for a book that I'd published, and I would look at the first page of the results, and my cover just didn't belong there. It wasn't in the same league as what was ranking and selling. Buyers are making a decision in a couple of seconds, and if your cover isn't at the level of what's already performing, they're clicking on something else. Some of those books I tried to fix. Others I looked at them and I knew the niche itself wasn't worth reinvesting in, so they went. There were also books that no longer represented where I was as a self-publisher now. Everyone who has been doing this for a while has early books. They would do completely different now. Your standards go up, your understanding of what makes a good book improves, and some of your older stuff starts to look like what it is. A first attempt. When someone finds one of your books and clicks through to your author page, they're seeing your whole catalog and they're making a judgment about you as a publisher based on what they see there. I didn't want my early experiments sitting alongside books that I was actually proud of, because that inconsistency does affect how people see you, even if they can't articulate why. And the last reason was books in niches I'd moved away from entirely. If you publish in a niche and then decide it's not one that you want to keep building books in, those books just sit there with nothing around them and nowhere to go. There's no plan to grow any other books around them, no series to point people towards, no related titles to keep momentum going. A standalone book in a niche that you've abandoned is just sitting there hoping to get lucky. And not only that, when someone lands on your author page and sees books scattered across completely unrelated niches with no thread connecting them, it doesn't build confidence. It looks like you were throwing things at the wall to see what sticks, which, if we are being totally honest, is what most of us were doing at the beginning. So how do you actually decide what stays and what goes? Because I'm definitely not saying that everybody should just go and delete half of their books this afternoon. What I am saying is that most catalogs have dead weight in them. And it is actually worth being really honest with yourself about which books are actually earning their place. The main thing that I looked at was sales. If a book hadn't made a single sale in 6 months, that was the starting point to look harder. Sometimes there was an obvious fix, like a listing that needed work or keywords that were clearly off. But more often than not, if a book had been sitting there for that long with nothing, the problem is structural. Wrong niche, wrong cover, not competitive enough, or too competitive. A tweak to the description is not going to save it. Before you decide to fix a book, ask yourself honestly whether the niche is actually worth fixing it for, or whether that time and energy would be better spent on something new. Then I looked at the competition for each book. I went back to Amazon and I searched for the main keyword, and I asked myself honestly, is there any realistic path for this book to rank on page one of search results? If the books are sitting at the top of the search results, had thousands of reviews, and had been in that niche for years, the answer was usually no. And if the answer is no, you have two choices. You invest seriously in making the book significantly better and go after it properly, or you let it go. What you can't do is leave it where it is and expect things to change. The cover test was the other big one. I'd look at page 1 of results for a book's main keyword and ask myself whether my cover belonged there. Not whether it was similar, but whether it was at that level. Whether it looked like it deserved to sit next to the books that were already ranking and selling. That's a different and much harder question. And when my honest answer was no, and I didn't want to reinvest in that book, it went. The last thing that I looked at was whether each book actually had a future in my catalog of books. Was I planning to build more books around it? Was it part of a niche I was committed to? Or was it sitting there in isolation with nothing around it and no plan for anything to ever be around it? Books that are a part of something bigger have a much better chance of building momentum over time. Books that are on their own and they're entirely dependent on their own performance, and if that performance isn't there, there's nothing to fall back on. So what actually happened after I did all this? The first thing that changed was my focus. When you've got a catalog of books that you're vaguely embarrassed about, or you've got books that you know aren't performing, they take up mental space, even when you're not actively or consciously thinking about them. There's always something nagging at you, some list of things that you're going to fix when you get time. Getting rid of them cleared something out. I stopped spreading my attention across a catalog full of books that weren't working and started putting that energy into the books that were working. The books that I kept got more attention, better listings, more thought out keywords, proper consideration of how each book sat within its niche. When your catalog is smaller and much more intentional, you can actually manage it. You notice what's working and you respond to it properly rather than just moving on to the next thing. I started treating each book that remained like it mattered because it now did. My author page started looking like something that I was proud of. There's a version of your author page that looks like a business, and then there's a version that looks like a collection of experiments. When someone finds one of your books on Amazon and clicks on your name, they see everything. A focused, consistent catalog that's clearly been built with some thought behind it tells a completely different story than a grab bag of random books in unrelated niches. People trust publishers that look like they know what they're doing. A curated catalog is part of how you build that. And the sales on the books that I kept improved, not because I had done something dramatic to those specific books in the moment, but because my energy was finally in the right place. I was thinking more clearly about what to publish next. I was making better decisions, and I wasn't constantly being pulled back to a long list of underperforming books I was planning to fix one day. That clarity is worth more than what you would realize. The thing that I want you to take from this is that more books doesn't automatically mean more income. A catalog full of books that aren't selling isn't progress. It's just a bigger list of books. The publishers who build real, consistent income from KDP are the ones who publish less, but they do it better. Better research up front, better covers, better listings, and the willingness to be honest about when something isn't working and let it go. Have a look at your books with fresh eyes. Ask yourself which books you would republish today, knowing what you know now, and which ones you would do completely differently or not at all. Be honest about which books are actually earning money and which ones are just sitting there doing nothing. Because the time and energy that you're spending managing a catalog full of dead weight is time and energy that could be going into building something that actually works. If you want to make sure your next books are worth keeping from the start, the free niche report that I talked about at the beginning of this video is down in the description box below. It's totally free, 100 profitable KDP niche opportunities with real demand behind them. So you're starting from a better place before you've even opened your design tool of choice. And if you did enjoy this video, YouTube thinks that you might like these ones too. So please go check them out to learn more about self-publishing your own low and medium content books on Amazon. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.